This is how the Apothecary Diaries Season 2 gave us the most satisfying, yet bittersweet payoff, while surprising everyone that Mao Mao and Jinshi were still the heroes in the very end. One of the best highlights of Season 2 of the Apothecary Diaries is the introduction of this new character in literally the first episode of the season. Jisui is a character that slowly gets sprinkled throughout. Slowly but surely, she fits this role of cute, sweet, bubbly, and Mao Mao even drops this major hint that she acts a little bit more noble than your average rear palace worker. As a personality type, she's like if Mao Mao and Xiaolan fused together. So you have that fusion of smarts and being upbeat, while being really into peculiar things like insects. So now we have the most wholesome set of three friends: the masochist, the puppy, the
I wish I was just Shisui.
and I guess you can't forget about Mao Mao. Where'd that frog sound come from? If you were like me, you questioned where this girl has been for the last 24 episodes. Very suspicious indeed. But the rear palace is big enough where there are probably many concubines and various workers we have never ran into the story before, like the craziness that happened to this casket girl, which provided very early on some foreshadowing for Shinmei. And like the old nurse lady who was the victim of the PDF file. I mean, imagine the world being ran by a mom. That is what I meant to say. The great thing about the Apothecary Diaries is that it's like this blend of slice of life mixed with Detective Conan. Every little bit of this mystery that starts to get fleshed out by Mao Mao's doing is a little payoff in itself within the episode, feeding into the overall picture of the ultimate payoff that is 2 seasons worth. I mean, this should be storytelling 101, but to do it well and keep it interesting is a whole other bag of mushrooms. It's kinda crazy how all these episodes eventually tie in together in the end, like during the ghost stories that connects to Suirei's grandmother and Taiho, who had a kid with the previous emperor. But that is where I think Mao Mao's adoptive father got blamed for her and banished along with that child. This ends up connecting to Suirei's half-sister's mom, Shinmei's vindictive payback for the previous emperor, because she thought she was going to climb the ladder to the very top, leaving the simp behind, but got made fun of instead by her peers because the emperor liked them even younger. And what forever scarred her ego is that it was Taiho who was Shinmei's super underage lady-in-waiting that the emperor had the baby with. To be honest, I had to wiki all this stuff because keeping track of 24 episodes worth of different little bits and pieces of information is a really wild task. Besides trying to put all the pieces together episode by episode, the slower paced nature of the storytelling can be seen as both good or bad, depending on your preference. I am somewhere in the middle. I preferred if the story capitalized on Jinshi almost dying out of nowhere near the end of season 1, and it wasn't really a thing again until the middle of season 2. But that's okay, because we got gunshots, frogs, dogs, and eventually those yummy insects. Most of season 2 really does take its time fleshing out every little inch of the story to build this grander, bigger picture. Someone is trying to yeet Jinshi. Suirei is still missing. Lolan is super duper mysterious. Her dad isn't really trying to hide his villainous face, and it took about episode 11 where Jinshi almost bit the bullet. When a story really takes its time exploring many details of the overall bigger picture, it just continues to set up a bigger and bigger, more satisfying payoff. Or a letdown. And boy, what is satisfying? And then annoyingly heartwarming, I wish I could have the cake and eat it too satisfying end. But that is what makes this season such a fulfilling one that mimics the various ways that life is just too unfair. You are born into circumstances out of your control, and the things that you can control, some other vindictive bitch, who is your mom, wants to control you. And on the other hand, from our MC's perspective, you have this pretty man that wants to insert his Kairu in you. And there is something some people might not want to address, but Jinshi also wants to use Mao Mao for her deductive skills as well. It is a power play to have an alliance with someone as brilliant as Mao Mao. So that is one other piece of the puzzle that makes this Jinshi and Mao Mao romance a little bit more complicated. If you can build the lore in an interesting way and have each episode feel like its own mystery and learning lesson, it is a thoughtful and entertaining way to keep us invested until the main plot ultimately unfolds into everything. Hyuga Natsu's ultimate grand plan finale would ultimately be for Lolan, Jinshi, and Mao Mao's character. Even though the Apothecary Diaries takes place in a fictitious world, it still mimics a time not too long ago. People forget that while culturally we may have slowly evolved out of a society that is commonplace for courtesans, indentured servitude, and classism, internally we are still susceptible to the 7 deadly sins, which makes the story all the more compelling when you have a villain we can all point our anger towards that is easy to hate, easy to be the scapegoat, and easy to provide as a natural plot device. Everything that went wrong in the palace up until this point of 2 seasons worth, this character is the representation of that. That is Shinmei, who clearly turned corrupt due to pride, and she literally manipulated her husband, her daughter, and the Shi clan to rebel against the empire. She did all the things we hate as an antagonist and villain, who turned Suirei, who we thought was such a badass character that faked her own death, came back to life, to being docile, beaten, and she literally got her blood licked by this. Well, I'm sure ironically, shooting yourself by mistake was a perfect metaphor that summed up her life. Where there are great evil villains, there are the ones that are somehow born so pure of heart that being bred by her own parents to be used for their own gain and revenge couldn't break through this sweet heart. And that sweet heart is Shisui. Not that one, but this one. She is the epitome of born into someone else's bullshit, made out to be a pawn and martyred for it. That martyr she did become, but only for Lolan, because it is Lolan that died that day. However, the Apothecary Diaries delivered one of the most impressively heroic stories that's not like your typical hero's journey. It is one act of kindness to another, and in turn, one act of love that ties in Jinshi, Mao Mao, and Shisui. From Jinshi's hairpin to Mao Mao's one last act to give something to Lolan, for her to try to hold on to life and not throw it away. The funny thing is, she still decided to throw it all away in the most bittersweet and devastating end I have witnessed to a character that doesn't deserve such a cold end that was instrumental in taking down all of her mother's corruption. But that is one of the more prominent lessons to the story. You can be a hero if you grab her hand, make her make a promise that will mentally have her valuing her life in the end, but it just so happens to be physically valuable as well, in more ways than one. Not only was the end as devastatingly filled with mixed emotions, I think the Xiaolan character development captured what we all felt in the end. Xiaolan, a character since the first season in episode 1 that represents your ordinary girl filled with the most purest of life forms, got all the blessings she deserved by the end of the arc. From illiterate to literate, from an average girl that just worked hard to scrape by, got rewarded and hired by a concubine, getting her to move out of the rear palace, and in a sense moving up in life, and one that just saw Mao Mao and Shisui as her dear friends that she just wants to see once again, to share the joy they had between them. This is the girl that had to be lied to about Mao Mao and Shisui's whereabouts. This is the golden retriever that we all must protect at all costs. And this is unfortunately what signals the end of an era as we know it, with Mao Mao showing the most emotions that she has shown up until this point. That is the sweet nectar of life. A personal note written by one of her closest friends. One day, it will all be gone, and you will have to plant those same seeds you had that sweet, sweet nectar from. It is that bittersweet taste of many of the characters moving on in their lives, with the truth being withheld. That is what the Apothecary Diaries Season 2 be like. And of course, our pretty man's sweet, sweet gaze and weak bite is followed by the next chapter for everyone, including the person formerly known as Lolan, as Tamamo, like the Tamamo no Mae legend that has to do with an empress and a shape-shifting nine-tailed fox. She trades away the thing that saved her life while also somehow keeping her promise. This marks a new journey for many of the characters in the story. And it is once again the words bittersweet, knowing that most people may never know that Shisui lived on as Tamamo. Yeah guys, let me know what you guys think about the Apothecary Diaries Season 2. I'm sure I'm like many people that wishes that everyone got to know the truth and were still able to live on fulfilling their life's desires. But that isn't reality. And I think the season's end capped off beautifully in the end in a poetic way with Tamamo. So yeah guys, let me know what you guys thought about the Apothecary Diaries Season 2. And do me a favor guys, hit the like button if you're excited about Season 3. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Check out my blog at otakusen.com. Check out my main channel. And I appreciate you guys watching. And I'll see you guys on the next video.